Welcome to Two Taps and Friends. Grab your favorite drink, get comfy, and let's dive into another episode of Two Taps and Friends.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Two Taps and Friends. Daniel Rosenberg here. Today, I have a very special guest and colleague of mine, attorney Lloyd Golburgh. Lloyd's been practicing criminal defense, now family law for how long, Lloyd?
32, almost 33 years.
32 years. When I came in, Lloyd's one of the guys that was a staple. We're colleagues. I would say friends. We're not very close, but I've felt more close. The reason why I have Lloyd on, just to segue, is today we're going to talk about the Israel issue. A lot of people avoid this. A lot of Jews try to avoid this. A lot of non-Jews try to avoid this. It's just a hot topic. It's a hot potato, right? Yep. Lloyd is a person that I've seen become very vocal in the last, not that you haven't always been vocal, but especially since October 7th, been very vocal, been putting yourself out there. I would call you a Zionist, pro-Zionist, and
Thank you.
I thought it was, obviously I am as well, so it's something that I've really been able to, I feel closer to you just in that, right, as a brotherhood.
Yep.
So I wanted to have you on because you know what you're talking about, and it's crazy because when you're watching this issue, and the thing that I rarely debate people on this anymore, because I used to do it when I was in law school and when I was in college. I would debate people, but I realized that very early that people are debating on different sets of facts. A lot of people have biases. It's very difficult, and it's very difficult for me to stay emotionally, in check, because I have, my parents are Israeli. I'm born in Brooklyn, New York. So I'm American, but I'm Israeli as well. I consider myself an American Israeli, so it's dear to the heart. My family has a house there. I go there. I've been there. I have hundreds of cousins there and family, so it's a very close connection. Some would say that I'm biased, but as lawyers, I think that our minds are wired a little bit differently than most other people, because in law school we're taught to see both sides, to study both perspectives, whether or not we agree with it. Being criminal defense attorneys, we're literally wired for this. Like, how many times, Lloyd, do you have a client where you just don't like them or her, could not ever do anything or even be accused of whatever they're being accused of, but yet you understand you got to defend the system and defend the law. So it's very almost offensive when I get called biased. You know what I mean? So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And, I wanted to kind of kick things off by, I wanted to see what your definition of Zionism is, because first of all, you hear the media, I don't know what they're doing now, where they're just saying, I'm not anti-Jewish, I'm anti-Zionist, which is kind of like the new hidden way to be, if you ask me, anti-Semitic, right? But go ahead, I'll let you.
Well, I understand the argument. Well, I can criticize the Vietnamese government and not be against the Vietnamese, right? So I can imagine it might be offensive to somebody who sincerely believes that their feelings and criticisms about the Israeli government are sincere and that they personally do not hate Jews.
Right.
And I appreciate that sentiment. However, again, like you said, so much is based on misinformation.
Right.
And when you ask them, okay, well, what other issues around the world, what other injustices are there around the world where you're so critical, where you're so focused, where you do research, where you argue with people online, where you send money or protest? And I will tell you that 98% of the time they're going to look at you with the eyes glazed over. So to me, when you are solely focused on anti-Zionism, first, you're coming from a place of a lack of information or misinformation, because you start, I think, from the premise that Zionism is bad.
Right.
So automatically, and that's on purpose. That's by that's by design to, through propaganda to demonize Zionism, demonize Israel, and how do you do that? By making Zionism a bad word.
Right.
Well, what is Zionism? Zionism is no different than any other indigenous group seeking to take control of their own destiny,
right.
And in their indigenous homeland. It seems to me to be what most liberals strive for, which is, self-determination in your indigenous homeland. So that's what Zionism is. It's the Jewish people's desire to reestablish their own self-determination, which I think everybody, even the ones that hate us, understand makes sense for Jews to want to do that, but in their indigenous homeland, from where we never left, and from to which we've always maintained our desire to return.
Right, and I think that bridges, and that's exactly what it is, literally self-determination. Do you believe, and people have this thought that, like, the Jews are trying to, like, reconquer an area or something where they don't really understand, and we're going to get into history. I guess we'll start with some of the history, but then we really have to get into some of the religious history. Start with the land history, right? It's just on a pure, right, you know where I'm going, right?
It starts at the beginning.
Right.
The beginning of this is the beginning.
Right, but on a pure, we'll get that, but the pure land basis, Judea, Samaria, Israel, these are the areas that the Jews, when they're talking about their homeland, they're talking about that. And these are areas
commonly known now, again, by design, is the West Bank.
The West Bank is Judea, Samaria.
Correct.
Right, but the nation of Israel is old as time, right? Like,
yeah, if I may,
sure.
I want to direct you to, and that is all true, because we can get into the issue of the land all day.
Right.
But I think that is a distraction. I think that we have to put it in a modern example so that people can relate to it.
Go for it.
And first of all, I think in my mind, and I could be wrong about this, but it's my perception that the perception is that Jews in 1948 all got on these big 747s and they just flew into this beautiful Tel Aviv, and Haifa, and kicked the Arabs all out of their, expensive condos and said, we're taking back our land.
Right.
And again, all of these lies that are told are perpetuated on purpose. So the actual fact of the matter is that Jews started returning, and they started returning en masse. There's no question about that. But the land that they ended up on, they purchased, they didn't steal, and most of the people that sold them that land weren't the people that were living on it, farmers, tenants. They were sold by well-to-do Effendi who lived in the northern part of the region. Right. So the Jews came in and they bought the swamp and they bought the desert. They didn't buy and weren't sold fertile land.
Right.
So if you look at pictures of Tel Aviv from, say, 1920, you're going to see a barren desert.
Completely barren.
So and that's what happened. They purchased the land. And when I say let's bring it to a real-world example so that people can relate to it, and I was talking to your wife off camera about this, but imagine Miami. So I grew up in Miami, and a Jewish kid in Miami, in Kendall, and at that time, before 1980, Miami was predominantly Jewish, mixed, a melting pot.
Right.
But it went from that to being Cuban overnight. Because in 1980, Fidel Castro opened up his prisons and he sent the Marielito Cubans en masse, 100,000 in a very short period of time.
Right.
Did we accuse them of colonizing Miami? Did we attack them? Did we run around saying from Broward County to the sea, Miami will be free? No, of course not. As a matter of fact, again, a very liberal perspective would be open borders. Let them come. Everybody has the right to the glory of the United States of America.
The barren land.
So that's what I liken it to, the double standard. So when a real world example, I live in a cul-de-sac. Again, it's the story I just told, so I feel weird telling it again, but I mean, tell you guys.
Go for it. It's a dry run.
I live in a cul-de-sac, so I come from Cuba, and I buy a townhouse in a cul-de-sac, okay? And you have all these other Miamians, Floridians that live there too. And then one night they all decide they don't want me living there, so they show up at my door and they're going to kill me, okay? And sure enough, I open up the door. They're all out there. They have torches, they have guns, weapons, and I grab my defensive firearm, I like to refer to it as, and I actually overcome and kill them. you better believe that next day, tomorrow, I'm going to go out and I'm going to secure my cul-de-sac.
Sure.
Right? Not because I attacked you, but because you attacked me. Why? Simply for being here.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And I didn't steal your townhouse, right? I didn't evict you from your townhouse. I bought that townhouse from your owner. So it's the same thing. That didn't happen. Of course that didn't happen. But that is the double standard. So that's the analogy that I like to make because it's that simple. It's people migrated. Now you can get into the whole the return and how we've longed for Jerusalem next year and all of that is absolutely true. But I like to try to stay away from the biblical as an explanation.
Well, I agree because the biblical. Listen,
It's important because that's where it all begins, and we have to talk about that because it's relevant now.
Well, that's but if you believe in the Bible, right, which a lot of people do, it's what placed them there, right? This is why they're in that area. But more so, the history, the artifacts is there. That was the Jews were there for hundreds and thousands of years, like we're talking. This is indisputable, you know what I mean? So you don't have to rely on the religion. Right. In my arguments, I don't rely on the religion. You just look at the history. You can look at the land history even. But
you can look at the objective facts.
Right.
That's exactly right. You know, a lot of this argument, too, I think people, again, the documents are there. Because, we can go back, and you have to go back to the beginning. Right. You have to go back to Genesis. That's where it all began. Right.
Most people say it didn't start October 7th. I'm like, yeah, you're right.
Or in 1948.
Right.
I mean, like you said, the Jews and the Arabs were living in the land of Palestine, which, again, named, moniker.
Colonial entity, the Palestine Mandate. Right?
Well, let's talk about that.
Right.
You want to go? You want to jump around?
I mean, let's jump around. I think once we hit a topic, we probably expand on it. Right?
This land never belonged to any particular nation state. This land, the land of Palestine, the Levant, and if you look at it on a map, which is huge, and you have to, no one does, but you'll see what is now modern-day Israel, and then you'll see to the east of that you have Jordan, and so that area, Lebanon, Syria, right. In the north, the Sinai.
Well, people don't even understand. Those are new nations as well. Like
those were all drawn up at the exact same, except for Egypt. Exactly. Those were all drawn up by Western colonialists at the same time that Palestine was divided by the Western colonialists. Exactly. The Jews didn't colonize that land; it was the other way around. Right. So the Ottoman, it was all part of the Ottoman Empire. Okay, and at the end of World War I, when the Allies won, the Ottoman Empire was destroyed and defeated and fell apart. Now you had lawless land. Right? You had no government. You had no nothing. So what happened? The United Nations, okay, the whole world got together and formed a consensus that this was what we're going to do.
When the United Nations wasn't biased and crazy. This is back, literally when it was at its purest.
It was, right.
After
World War II. It was the League of Nations at the time, right? And again, so I like to liken it to the United Nations because that is what people can relate to in current times. But it wasn't the Jews just went there. The world decided this is what's appropriate, okay? What we're going to do now is we need a government. There's nobody running the show. So the world picked the British government to control and run the area until, everybody can settle in and then figure out what's going to happen.
Exactly.
Right? So there wasn't just the British mandate, there was the French mandate too, which created the land boundaries with Lebanon and Syria, right? And then, of course, we know what happened next. The British controls and rules the area, colonizes the area for 20 years. And then finally, because of their own politics, right, the British did this.
Right.
You want to cut this podcast off? The British did this because they promised the land to both. People don't know that either. They promised the land to the Jews and they promised the land to the Arabs behind their backs. So, of course, both sides are going, so what happened? So, again, it was determined through the partition, right, that Israel was going to get, the Jews were going to get a certain part, the Arabs were going to get a certain part. There would be a mutual exchange of land, a required mutual exchange of some people, because obviously there was friction. There had been a civil war right around that same time before the creation of the State of Israel.
The Jews, there was pogroms, there was pogroms, like there was all this, there's a lot. But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, they've been killing us I mean, this is the other thing people don't realize too. I mean, forever, you know, from the beginning when Muhammad decided that, you know, he had to go, he was actually sort of expelled from Mecca, and then he made his pilgrimage to Medina and tried to proselytize and convert the Jews, and the Jews were like, come on, man, we've been here 2,500 years, who are you?
Right.
You know, like, leave us alone. And the Christians were the same. They were like, you know, hey, we've been here 600 years, who are you? So, of course, you know, Muhammad's response was to then, you know, rule by the sword.
Right.
So it kind of starts there, but you know, you can talk about all that, those thousands of years, and they are relevant, boys.
Well, we'll
when
get
you
into
start,
that. I think we jump into that next.
There'll be more. Yeah. When you start reading it, you realize that the time, it seems like thousands of years, and it is technically, but from a practical perspective, it's really not. When you start reading about the history and how, you know, basically it was like
decisions.
you know, and everything in terms of, you know, why the Jews went back there in the first place. You know, it's like they never stopped trying to go back, but kept getting kicked out. Right. First it was the Assyrians, and then, you know, then we were lucky. We regained control for a while after the Assyrians were conquered by the Persians, I believe it was, right? And then the Persians, then they kicked us out, and then the Christians came, and so it was like everybody kicked us out. We were always trying to go back, but they kept kicking us out.
Right.
So we never stopped it. But from the modern time, you know, it starts in the 20s.
Right.
You know, when the anti-Semitism, the pogroms were occurring in Russia and in Eastern Europe, right? And Jews were trying to get the heck out of Russia because they were going to kill us there. So it was like, okay, let's go back home. Let's go back to Palestine. You know, we have family there. We know people. Let's go, like anybody would. Right. And of course, again, I'm not discounting the impact that had on the Muslim population, but there were no Palestinians. There was no Palestine. There was no nation state.
Palestinians were Jews. If you look up the Palestinian
they all were Jews. Palestine, the newspaper, the coin, Oldemaier, you know.
Hebrew on the coins.
Of course. The Palestinians were, Jews were referred to as Palestinians.
Right.
That was another thing that was appropriated by the
Yasser Arafat, 1960,
no, 1960.
He was 1963, right?
1964 or something like that.
Right before
the PLO was established, and that's when you now had this Palestinian nation. That was born in 1964, 1965, something like that, with the PLO. But what I was trying to say, and it took me a long time to get there, was that the Muslims have been killing the Jews regularly and without interruption since the 1920s, since Jews started coming back. And at first it was okay. You know, when the Jews came, there was optimism amongst the Arabs and the Muslims. As a matter of fact, again, the documents are there. Go read the Balfour Declaration, read the Peel Commission report, read the Partition Plan. Heck, how many people have read Theodore Herzl's manifesto?
He's like Hitler. It's ridiculous.
And if you read it, it's like the official, and of course you have your extremes, but the official policy of the Jewish the Jewish organization that was
Haganah?
No, that was the military. I can't remember the name of it, but the civil organization that they help facilitate the migration, buying property there, selling property here, all of those things. When they got there and they started to cultivate the land and they started to take advantage of the resources and build, the Arabs were coming too. The Arabs were coming from the north, and they were like, "Wow, this is awesome. Let's go." Right. And of course, when you had more and more migration, not evil, we're going to steal your land migration. No, we need to come there because thank God we're now out of Russia. But now look what's happening in Europe, in Western Europe. Now, now Hitler wants to kill us all. So more came, of course, and that stressed everybody. And then you started to have conflict. You started to have overlap, and that's why it led to ultimately a civil war. And then, the ultimate creation of the State of Israel, which, again, wasn't unilateral by the Jews. It was the whole world that decided, okay, we're going to vote on this. They voted for partition. They voted to establish the State of Israel, right? And then the next day, not 24 hours later, all of the Arab countries decided to attack.
Right, but that goes back to, and we have to kind of tie into some of the religious history here, right? Because
Why? The why.
The why. Like the Arab world, and I don't know if you heard of God's Side. He's a really good.
I know him very well.
Right. Like he was on the. He made his point. Like you said, it's an affront. It was an affront on the Arab world, right?
Which part? The migration or the establishment?
Historically, when there's a caliphate or a Muslim-controlled area by Arabs,
Yeah.
if you lose that in war or whatever it may be, it's your duty till the end of time to regain that, right? That's what they talk about in Spain, Andalusia, and those areas that were there. They say it in there, and they say, well, hopefully we get Andalusia back.
Yes.
So,
yes. The Muslims believe
right.
that once they settle on land, it's their land. It
Right.
doesn't matter what
To
happens.
the end of time.
It doesn't matter what happened before, who owned it before. This is why you can look this up. The Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is built on top of the Jewish temple, the holiest temple.
Right.
So obviously, from an archaeological perspective, you can't deny the Jews were there first.
Right.
But the Muslims do believe, sincerely believe this, that once they settle in a land, it's their land forever.
Right. So, but if you understand that in the backdrop, when they agree, when you're saying in the 30s or whatever, they agreed on a division, they never agreed on anything. They've never agreed on dividing land.
Who? The Muslims,
The
and the
Muslims,
Jews?
the Arabs can't agree on dividing the land.
No.
Based on these principles.
No.
Right?
In the partition plan that was initially proposed, the Arabs were going to get 75% of the land, including all of the fertile land, including Judea and Samaria, including Jerusalem and the Golan. All of it.
All of it.
The Jews were getting the desert, the Negev.
Jews said yes.
90, that's right. And the Arabs said no, and it happened again at the Oslo Accord. They were offered Bill Clinton offered them 96% of the West Bank. And the other 4% was going to be a land switch.
A land swap.
So it wasn't like they were going to lose 4% of actual land, but again, this is the modern day argument. And it's an argument within an argument, because it starts at the beginning, it starts at the Bible. And it starts with Muhammad, okay, in the 7th century, when Muhammad decided that he was going to try to convert, and the Jews said no. And it began there, okay? At that point, you want to talk about colonists? Muslims, Arabs come out of the Arabian Peninsula, in the south.
Saudi Arabia.
Right? They didn't come from Palestine, right?
Or North Africa.
They come from the Arabian Peninsula. Sure. And the only reason that they left the Arabian Peninsula was because Muhammad had to, right? So he was a peaceful prophet in the beginning. If you look at if you read the Quran, the first half of the Quran is very peaceful. They were in the Quran. It's very accepting. It requires Muslims to respect Christianity and Judaism. Right. It requires that Muslims respect the Old Testament and the New. But there is also a provision in Islam whereby the next revelation that came from Gabriel to Muhammad, if that revelation contradicts a prior revelation, it changes it, and the old revelation has nothing to do with it. And you can see this in the Quran. When you read the Quran, and it goes, when it's peaceful. And again, more propaganda. You'll hear people spout the peaceful portions of the Quran in order to try to manipulate dumb Westerners into thinking Islam is peaceful. But that ignores the fact that if you continue on, once Muhammad migrates from Mecca to Medina, he becomes violent, right? Right. And so does the Quran. And at that point on, it's all about the Jews. It's like the Jews. The Jews are the enemy. We've got to kill the Jews. The Jews are monkeys. The Christians, too. This is why there's the cliche. You know it. You know, the Jews on Saturday, everybody else on Sunday, because it's not just Judaism. It's any infidel, any non-believer is in their mind, again, it's not an evil intent. They believe that God, who says, and they believe we all share the same God, but that Muhammad is the prophet who usurped Christ, who usurped all of the Jewish prophets, right? And that you must obey him. So everything after he makes his migration as violent. And then the Hadith, which is, of course, the second most holy book, if you will, in Islam, is the writings and the teachings of Muhammad himself. And it's all about how the Jews rejected, God, and therefore they are not worthy of even being considered human beings. So it does begin there, okay? And again, I was talking to you about this, in Genesis, that, and it does, I believe it starts there. I believe it starts when Abraham, who could not have a child with Sarah, right? Sarah says to Abraham, you can have my mistress, my Egyptian mistress, and you can, have relations with her. The way the Bible tells it, she didn't expect Hagar to get pregnant, but Hagar gets pregnant, and they give birth to a son, Ishmael. And then, lo and behold, years later, when Abraham is 100 years old, Sarah gives birth to Isaac, because God promised Abraham that he would bear him a child. So she does. She bears him Isaac, a child born in wedlock, but Ishmael's younger brother.
Right.
And what happens? God says to Abraham, you're going to give the legacy, you're going to give Ishmael's legacy to Isaac, a younger brother, right? And this, to me, is where the split begins, and I believe that the Muslims are forever jealous of the Jews as a result of that.
Well, and when we say that to the listener, it sounds like, what, you think this person's jealous because of that story? No. But that leads to the major problem that we have now, is the radicalization of the people, right?
I'm glad you went there.
Right. Well, we have to, because if I'm taught since I'm young that fire, and I'm told that dragons are bad, they eat you. Even if I've never met a dragon, I'm scared of a dragon for the rest of my life. I know to stay away from a dragon, so that might be the catalyst, but the stories that go down are that the Jews are bad, the Jews are this.
And by the way, that's by design too. The education program, the system,
100%.
in their curriculum, okay, when I say them, I'm talking about specifically now. I'm talking about, like, the Palestinians that are considered under international law to be refugees, controlled and taken care of by UNRWA.
Right, but it doesn't say, but
in their curriculum, it's,
completely pushed there.
2 + 2 is 4. Well, if you kill 2 Jews and you rape 2 Jews, how many Jews have you raped and killed? 4. Excellent. You're, good for you.
Right, and that's an extreme example of it, but that's what they're literally doing in these areas. But in the Arab world,
it's not hyperbole.
But in the Arab world, not just in these areas, the Arab world in the last 60, 100 years, they've not been taught that, maybe not that radical, but the Jews are bad. Like, anti-Semitism in the Islamic and the Muslim world is rampant. Like, even friends that I'm friends with now that are Muslims, and they're friends of mine, they're not radical, and when I speak to them, I call them out. I'm like, listen, you can't admit to me, you have to admit to me, you can't tell me that there's not anti-Semitism that you've heard all your life, and they will all admit it to you.
Of course, if they're raised in a Muslim family, and in order to be Muslim, by the way, you can't just say you're Muslim.
Right.
It requires certain acts,
Submission.
certain physical acts.
Right.
Okay, praying, making your.
When I say submission, you know what I mean.
So there are different kinds of Muslims. There are I shouldn't say kinds, categories.
Right.
You have regular everyday people that they're born Muslim, they grew up in a Muslim household, but they they can pick and choose, just like we do and Christians do. You look at the Bible and you're like, okay,
that doesn't make sense.
The pig and the lay down with it, no, okay, that part doesn't make sense. But love thy neighbor, that part I agree with.
Right.
Because you can decide on your own.
Right.
So there are those kinds of Muslims that, they or those categories, I should say, where, they go about their daily life like everybody else, and they don't hate anybody. And then you have, the more devout Muslims, okay, that aren't necessarily of the mindset of engaging in physical jihad, but they are very devout. And if the Muslim friends that you have grew up in that environment, and then of course the next step is jihad, holy war. And don't let them tell you that it's not physical holy war, that it's psychological holy war, it's educational holy war, it's human rights holy war. No, jihad is holy war.
There's bullshit. There's a history. There's a literally, you can see a pattern.
Of course.
Right?
And jihad, by the way, is one of the 5 pillars of Islam.
The highest pillar
is required.
Right.
So
that's what
the high. No, the high. I beg your pardon. I'm semantic now, but really the highest is that no other God comes before God, and
Right, but I'm saying
no other prophet comes before Muhammad.
in the progression, I mean, that's why you see a lot of the clear.
Oh, 1%, yeah.
You get what I'm saying? Tend to be, that's where the jihad level is. And you know, say that the Moshe Hassan, the Green Prince, says it good in his book. He says,
awesome.
in the ladder of, let's just say, Islam, there's always, of course, good, God-fearing, peaceful Muslims. But then the problem is that at the higher level, there is jihad, right? And you never know at what level the person is, because there's progression. So that's the issue that you have. And that's a generalized statement.
And it is a tenet of Islam that in order to protect the faith, it can lie to you. Right. And that is sanctioned by God. That is the term. So, and again, that they believe sincerely that is.
If it furthers
legitimate. So they're not going to tell you, yes, Danny, if you turn your back on me, I'm going to stab you in the throat. Because they are allowed to do that.
Right. So as a nation like Israel, like you're saying, you're just protecting your fort now because you've been attacked so many times, and you've come to the table so many times, and you've conceded land, and you've come with all these plans, and Omar gave even more land. Remember one of the last one was like the most. When there's a realization, and that's what people ask about Israeli politics, there's a left and there's a right, just like anywhere else. Yeah. There's people that really just want to mend and make peace and just want this, and then there's the side that kind of like, we're like, listen, we could be tricked by this over and over again, and they keep stabbing us, or we're just going to take our position. And now, when you have something like October 7th happen, we'll get into that, the middle becomes bigger, because people start to see, like, if everything we do, we try to concede, we try to make peace, but they just don't want it. They keep telling you they want all of the land. They want us out of there. At what point do you stop trying to have a meaningful negotiation with these people? Well, and that's the issue that you have, is that you have people that aren't extreme that say, listen, unless we have a conversation about the fact that their kids are taught to kill Jews, we can't have a conversation.
This is why I feel like it's not complicated at all.
Right.
It's not complicated at all. If you're honest, look in the mirror and say, where around the world are Jews aggressive? Who are we invading? Who are we conquering? Who are we killing? Are you kidding me? We walk down the street, we see a stranger, we cross the street. I don't care what color that person is.
Right.
Right? It's because that's who we are.
Right.
It boggles my mind. Go look at the list of the people that got arrested for violent crimes last month. Tell me how many of them were Jews. They're going to be some, of course. I'm not sitting here saying, the whole word, the chosen people.
There's a bill that I don't like.
Come on,
when I hear the right wing say that, the extreme right wing, they're like, they're God's chosen people. We need to follow them. I'm like, oh, stop. Let's look at that's tangible fact.
Right? We're not special.
Right.
Okay. I mean, God thinks. Again, you can get into the biblical story, but that's a bunch of bullshit. We're not special. Right. But we're not. We're not aggressive people by nature. Like I said, you come to me, show me, bring it. I'll sit here and wait. You bring me the historical record where Jews are attacking people. They're not. It's that simple. Look, Danny, it comes down to the ideology. Okay? The problem, the reason why there's an impasse is because one side wants us dead, wants the other side dead, and the other side doesn't want to be dead. So how can you negotiate that? Right? Well, we'll let you kill us sometimes. And I understand the internal battle inside Israel. You have left and right. You have a multi-diverse democracy where everybody's free to be, including Arabs. You don't have that.
People don't understand how diverse Israel is. They think they're all Jews who look like me and you.
They think they're all white.
Right. That's what I'm saying. And I'm half North African. My grandmother is Libyan,
brown people.
Moroccan. My cousins, they look like they're like Mexicans.
Again, facts matter. The majority of
we're Arabs. They look like Arabs.
The majority, there are 2 million Arabs that live free in Israel.
100%. Full right.
A lot of them who, by the way, never left the Arab quarter in Jerusalem during the war and are still full citizens today.
Right. There's a reason for that too. If you want to get into this,
because they weren't expelled.
They were never expelled. If you look at the history, the Arab armies were telling people to leave so they can go and take care of the Jews. It'll be a couple days and you'll come back. Again, they left those people stranded.
In a sober, objective world, yes, people were expelled. Okay? But what do we hear? 700,000 Arabs were evicted, thrown out of their land, they're refugees forever.
The Nakba.
The Nakba. Exactly. The loss of the war that they started.
Exactly.
And again, whole other conversation.
Sure.
But people were expelled, okay, because you had a war. So you had hostiles on both sides.
Sure.
So you had Jews that were expelled from Arab areas. You had Arabs that were expelled from Jewish areas, okay? That is a necessary requirement, and that happens in every war everywhere, because you're not just going to say, okay, the war is over. I know you're right there and I'm right here, and we're not going to kill each other now that the war's... I know that you killed my daughter 2 weeks ago and that I killed your dad 6 weeks ago, but now that the war's over, we're good. No, one of us is out. So that did happen. But you're right. When the State of Israel was created and the Arab League, all of the surrounding nations decided that they were going to destroy Israel, okay, and lost to this little Jewish nation, okay, of course, that's the Nakba. It's the embarrassment that they lost the war. That's what the Nakba is. And they will not live it down until they fix that.
Exactly. And they're not going to teach their children that they lost the war. They're going to teach their children this radicalization. And you know what? We have to jump into October 7th now. We have to get to October 7th. So the history is there. The land history is there. If you were willing to unbiasedly look it up, it's there. And you want to read, it's there.
Yep.
October 7th happens.
Yep.
And October 7th is a pure display of the level of hate.
Yep.
And the level of depravity and what one side is willing to... They're showing you what they would do. And when they say that those are Hamas, it's radical, I'm sorry to tell you, that's not true. I wish it was true. I wish that Hamas was... And I'm not saying every Palestinian is wanting to slaughter people, but when the schooling is the way it is, when the radicalization is the way it is not a minority, and you can see it in the way that they return hostage bodies, the way they return babies' bodies, and they're celebrating as if it's some concert. This is what would happen if Israel laid their arms down for a second, right? And the fact that nobody wants to have that conversation on the other side, they want to immediately start talking about the old grievances that Jews can talk about all day, right?
There is no before to them.
Right.
Okay, there's no before. Honestly,
but they'll say that.
If you go through, so every now and then, I'll peruse the other side.
Me too. I have to be careful because I don't want to get flooded with their stuff.
Right. Well, you can't click on it.
Yeah.
But the algorithm. So people, again, we're blind to the fact that we're being fed what we look for.
Sure.
So when you start clicking on shit on social media, you're going to get in response stuff that meets your already preconceived notion, right? So we're going to see Arabs killing Jews all day. Well, it's the same on their side. It's their algorithm shows them, Palestinian babies being blown up left and right. So in their mind, again, it's not evil and depraved. In their mind, it's sincere and it's legitimate and it's in pursuit of Islam and it's in order to appease Allah. Okay, they don't see it as evil. They see the Jews as animals, as the devil, as creatures to be mutilated,
right,
like they did to us on October 7th.
Right.
And they teach you. I brought this book with me. It's called Islam and the Jews. Mark Gabriel is the author. Mark Gabriel grew up in Egypt to a very devout Muslim family. He studied the Quran. He was a jihadist. He taught Islam at the university in Egypt. He was a full-blown, and he found Jesus. And he says in this book, everything that we're talking about, that you could put aside all the politics and all the lies. The bottom line is that the Muslims, not the Muslims, I'm sorry. He actually makes this point. Let me do this. It's important.
Sure.
He says that and I agree with this, the Muslims aren't the problem. Islam is the problem. And that Muslims are also victims of Islam. And I like that because I don't hate anybody. Anybody that knows me, I'm vocal and I'm a Zionist because I believe in our right to self-determination in our indigenous homeland, and I can live next to you as long as you don't fucking kill me.
Right.
That's my
fair enough.
I don't hate anybody except assholes. And I don't care, you can be any race, color. If you're an asshole, I hate you. If you're not, I don't care. I like you. That's how I am. He will tell you that they are taught from the time they are little children in their schools, in their mosques, everywhere in their social situations, whatever it is, that the Jews are the enemy and the way to God is to kill them. Okay, and they're not going to stop. It's not going to end. Not until, again, we can take all of this complication and break it down. To me, it's very simple. When the Muslims decide to lay down their weapons and to give up their Jew hate, homicide ideology, there will be peace.
It's pretty fixable. When it comes, without that, it's more fixable.
But Lloyd, the checkpoints and the roadblocks and the wall, the apartheid
What do you think
wall.
those are there for? It's not a part.
This is what I mean. There's no before. Right. And this is what I was getting to. When you read their Facebook posts, their Instagram posts, it's like October 7th did not happen. There's no cause and effect. It doesn't exist. It didn't happen. And for example, you read it and they're like, how long is this going to go on? When will this end? And my response is, what do you mean when will it end? When you release the hostages tomorrow. It'll be over. What part of when will it end? It's all in your control. Because either the algorithm, right, is not feeding them the actual facts because they watch Al Jazeera, who's owned by Qatar, who finances all of this crap.
Qatar's financing so much.
Again, you read it and it's like it's bizarre. October 7th didn't happen. In 1948, they didn't attack the Jews and lose. The Jews just attacked them. In 1967, same thing. Why are we in the West Bank? Oh, Jews are occupying the West Bank. Why? Anybody want to talk about why?
Right.
Because they were.
You're trying to kill us.
Because again, they try to attack us again. And we beat them. Jordan was in control at the time, and because they took it in 1948.
Right.
Jordan colonized the West Bank in 1948.
Right.
Had it for 20 years. Didn't do anything with it. Didn't create a Palestinian state. Nobody cared.
In Gaza, Egypt.
And then of course in 1967, same thing. The Arabs decided we're going to go get Jerusalem again. Let's go, and lost again. And at that point, we took back the West Bank, which is Judea and Samaria. This is where you have to look at the map. Okay? Why can't you have the demarcation there? Just get out of the West Bank. Get out and give it to the Arabs because it's this close.
It's like 6 minutes to attack.
It's what? The fattest distance between the two is 9 miles.
Right.
Between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem.
Right.
So of course you can't just pack up and leave because if you do, they're going to kill you tomorrow.
That's what the issue has to be tackled. Yeah. And that's what worries me about when you listen to the politicians talking. Unless you're starting with this hate and radicalization, it's not a solvable problem. It's not, because it's not about land swaps.
Right.
Land swaps are easy relative to this.
No,
right?
What I mean is that's a conversation within a conversation, but it is not the cause. And anybody that says it's about land is misinformed.
And listen, but what's mind-boggling is that you on October 7th, like there's videos, like you see it, but the algorithm's so strong that they're so entrenched in it that they're willing to overlook it.
You can't put it up now. And this has happened since October 7th. And you're right, I've been vocal since October 7th. Before that, I wasn't vocal. Before, my social media was designed for marketing.
Sure.
And everything I did was on purpose. And everything that I did on social media had a reason. And it was all to manipulate a response to business.
Sure.
But after that, I saw the response and how people were ignoring what happened, and the gloves came off. And I sacrificed all. I've lost all of my childhood friends because I'm the only, myself, my brother, we're the only ones that went from complete hippies, Democrats our entire lives, bleeding heart liberals, voted for Obama twice, Hillary Clinton.
Same here.
Right? And then in 2020, that all changed when the Democratic Party decided to embrace the squad and not reject their anti-Semitism, and they allowed that to grow.
That's what's mind-boggling to me.
And I'll have to leave the party.
People are like, you changed. Like, no.
I didn't change.
The line moved way too
I
far.
didn't
Of course not.
A bit.
Of course not.
They changed.
But that's what's wild to me is that, like, the question then becomes, if you're not willing, if the history is so clear and the hate is there and it's on video, and you're still not willing to talk about this, at least, to talk about the hate, at some point you're going to be called an anti-Semite. That's where people say, you can't just say anti-Semite. No. If you're willingly choosing to ignore everything we just talked about, to ignore what we just saw, to ignore every time they return hostages, the whole city turning out and celebrating, babies, literally strangling babies and then giving them, you're willing to ignore that there's something there. Like in your mind, you're thinking, well, the Jews must have done something, or the Jews and the Jews, and it's so pervasive. And it's the first time that I have to tell you, like, I never understood, like, I used to always say in Nazi Germany, right, I used to say, like, the Germans were like an intellectual people. They were smart people, the ancient civilizations for hundreds of years. How did they get duped into thinking it was okay to throw people in ovens, right?
Well, God tried.
Exactly.
It's the parasitic mind virus of illiberalism. Now we're getting into the next podcast.
Right, we'll get there, but I mean...
That's why, because of the parasitic mind virus. Liberalism, as much as I've loved it my entire life, and it's made everything in my life possible, it always ends up in illiberalism. Every single time.
Look taken too far.
Look through the history of time. The more liberal you become, the more individual you become, then you start breaking up into your own little thing, and then time goes by and you start finding like-minded people, and then all of a sudden you become tribal. And then they become tribal, and now you have conflict, and then everybody starts digging in, and then you end up with, socialism, and then communism, and then, the death of millions,
right?
Before people wake up and say, oh shit, that was
it happens on the other side too. Like, I love that one. You see, like, the left and right, it goes like this, like this, like this, and then it meets.
That's right.
And it's wild to watch. And I think people are like, well, what's the solution? And we'll obviously go on plenty. We can do multiple podcasts about this where we literally specifically probably talk about
one issue instead of, this is our first time.
This is the intro.
There's a lot to talk about.
But we're talking about a solution, right? Like, how do we denazify? You hear that? Denazifying Germany. That takes a long time. It's very difficult, strenuous, and one side has to kind of concede that this is an issue for them, right? But this is such a long-standing belief in that culture. I don't know how you get around it, And then when Trump comes out and says, "Hey, we're going to take Gaza and put them in Arab countries," listen, it sounds crazy, but come up with better solutions. I don't have one. Do you?
I try to avoid the Trump.
I agree. I don't want to go there. I'm not condoning or anti or anything.
Right. Of course. I'm accused of being a Trumper now, and I accept that because of my position. But of course,
it's crazy. Wow.
There are plenty of
pro-Israel. You're a Trumper now. That's just scary. That's what drives me crazy too.
Well, that's a whole nother conversation. Sure. For me, it could take a whole podcast.
Yeah, we'll do that in another.
To me, is the lesser two evils in terms of how it relates to this particular issue.
And this is a major issue, and this is what I was saying. So, like, I never understood this.
Which is another reason why I lost friends, because I have friends that are on the left that will say, "How could you vote for somebody who wants to throw me out of the country? I hate you." And I'm like, okay, I understand that. I understand your perspective. I understand how it affects you and your family, and how that could be scary as hell. And man, I'm glad I'm not on a green card status right now, exercising my free speech. But I'll turn the table on you. I feel genuinely in my heart that if Kamala Harris had won the election, it would be even worse for the Jews, because the administration would have automatically bent to their anti-Semitic, very progressive part of the party, and they would have pulled funding, they would have pulled weapons. And it would have been and Israel would have been out there on an island right now.
Right.
Okay. And so that's why I, had no choice in my mind. And they will not accept that. So if I say to them, if they say, well, voting for Trump is going to get my grandmother deported, and I say, yeah, but voting for Harris is going to get my family killed, they don't care. It's like, I don't care. Fuck you. How could you vote for Trump? You're a mother.
And
I'm like, look, I saw your point. You don't. Nope.
And that's the thing. And we could bring it back around and come full
what's
circle now. When I said that I feel closer to you now, even though we've never really hung out.
We read the same books. We know we are the same authors.
Since Nazi, I never can understand how Nazi Germany could turn the way it is. Right. Since October 7th, and after it happened, friends of mine that know nothing about the Middle East call me and be like, "Oh my God, it's crazy what they did to Jews here." And I told them, a couple days they'll turn this on us. Why? And it always happens. But now,
or even we retaliate.
This is the first time in my life where I've literally felt, and when I say unsafe, I'm not scared to walk out, but as a Jew, you feel attacked from all angles. And you understand now why Israel is so important. Because Israel is literally the only country that I think you can really 100% guarantee that the tide doesn't change on you so quickly. And that's why when I say I feel more,
It's the reason for
bring Jews together when you're doing
Of
it.
course. What happened on October 7th and the reaction from the world since makes us realize, I hope, by the way, too many Jews don't realize this. Everyone hates the Jews, period. Everyone hates the Jews. Okay, let's fucking lay it out there. I don't know, are we allowed to curse on this thing?
Yes, we are.
So everyone hates the Jews, okay? So don't pretend that they don't. And I feel bad for anti-Zionist Jews because they are suffering from the parasitic mind virus of suicidal empathy. They feel so guilty as Jews for whatever reason that they feel like, well, if I turn away from my own people, then I'll fit in over here and you won't send me to the gas chambers. And you know what I say to those Jews? We're all, a Jew, a Zionist Jew and a non-Zionist Jew walk into a bar and the bartender says, we don't serve Jews here, you know? So in other words, it doesn't matter what kind of Jew you are, whether you are a pro-Palestine, free Palestine Jew, you're on that train with us. You might be on the last car, but you're still on that train. Don't think you're not. And I remind people of that all the time. So I don't know if this is where you're going now because I interrupted you.
No.
But yes, I feel like we have been forced again, maybe this is God, saying, remember the covenant. You're ignoring each other, you're ignoring me, I'm going to teach you a lesson. This is what's going to happen on October 7th, okay? And the result of that is going to be Jews are going to wake up and go, hey, wait a second, there's only 15 million of us in the entire world. The anti-Semite Bella Hadid has 15 million Instagram followers.
Exactly.
So we have no chance in the propaganda war. All we can do is band together to protect ourselves.
Right, and Israel is the personification of that. And listen, whether you religiously believe that or not, it's what's happened. When everybody feels so attacked, you come closer together. But that's a good place for us to kind of wrap right now because we could do this better. I'm going to have you back on.
Depositions at 2 o'clock.
Okay, of course. But I'm going to have you back on, and I think we'll go more.
If you want to, I don't know. After this, people might be like, hey, Rosenberg. I might want to steer clear of that.
No, that's never going to happen. Don't worry about it. If they tell me that, I go right towards it. That's the nature of the beast.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? But thank you, Lloyd, for coming on.
Welcome.
I appreciate you, brother. If you need anything from me, I'm always
Sound
here.
guys might be upset because
The sound guys, they're always a little bit upset at me, but it's okay.
7 times.
You're good. You did a good job. Thank you for coming on, Lloyd.
You're welcome.
For all of our viewers, thank you for joining us. I'm being told I have to tell you this after every video. Please like and subscribe to the channel. We're on YouTube, YouTube Music, Spotify, iHeartRadio. We're literally everywhere. Apple Podcasts. Please like and subscribe. Hope you enjoyed. See you again soon. Love you all. Cut.